What would you say if I told you that there was a watch that was maybe the coolest modern independent watch, and I bet you that almost none of you have ever even heard of it? Oh, and by the way, it's made by two of the most famous brands in this entire modern independent horological world. Crazy, right? You wouldn't believe me. And yet, that's the case, and I'm about to show you that watch today. Now this piece, if you've guessed it, is called the Nitro. The Nitro is by a brand that 100% none of you could ever say out loud. It's C3H5N3O9. What? That's a brand name? Yeah, it is. It is a brand that was created by MB&F and Urwerk in a collaboration that they deliberately didn't want you to know about. Now, what the heck am I even talking about? This is weird, right? So let's go all the way back, and we've got to go to the early 2010s. Felix and Max start talking to each other. Felix, of course, of Urwerk, Max of MB&F, and they've been mutual friends and admirers of each other for a long time at this point, and they really wanted to do a project with each other. But the problem was, neither of them understood or had an idea of how they could do it with their retail channels, because both MB&F and Urwerk, of course, sell through retailers, not direct to customers, and they didn't have the same retailers. So if they made a watch together, who would get the watch? How would it sell? You know, how would it work, basically? And they came up with sort of the weirdest plan that anybody's ever heard of, which was to make a secret watch. So they came up with the idea that they would have a brand, the name that I told you, let's just call it Nitro, and I'll explain why. And it would have an unpronounceable name. And they would make an extremely cool watch, and they would just make a website for it. And you'd just go on the website and order the watch on the website. This is now in 2012. And this was like an unheard of thing to get it was like $120,000 or so. Right through a website, which was crazy in 2012. So unpronounceable name, crazy watch. You just go to the website, order it, and that's it. And they would do no PR. They wouldn't basically tell anybody about it. It would just be a word of mouth thing within the watch community. And that's what they did. This is just one of the coolest packaging presentations that I've ever seen. So you have this outer carton that's this sort of unfinished cardboard. It's got bare staples on the outside, and the top has the unpronounceable brand name C3H5N3O9, which is the chemical composition of nitroglycerin. Of course, nitroglycerin is this explosive that famously is very volatile, and it can explode if handled improperly. So inside you have this box that's this rough aged wood with these aged metal brackets and all this exposed metal, and it really is supposed to look like something out of Indiana Jones or something, like you found this nitroglycerin somewhere. It's got a level in it to make sure that you don't mishandle the nitroglycerin, and there's even, you know, some jokes here. Right here it says, "Warning, shaking this box is surely your last super cool idea." There you have the brand name, and this is Experiment ZR012. Fragile, handle with care. So it's got this whole cool thing, and the box is actually functional. You know, it's got these aged metal handles. And in here, again, all these metal tube holders has this glass tube suspended in the air, just like it's a very volatile explosive. Really cool. These are heavy metal. You can't see, but this is metal. They're very heavy. It pulls off, and you're able to pull the watch out, which you can kind of see through the cutout there. But this comes out, this whole tube. And this is foam. This opens It's form cut, and boom, there you have the watch. How cool is that, guys? Obviously, the first thing you'll notice is that you've never seen anything else like this. There just isn't anything, the case, the movement, there's really nothing else that this even brings to mind. It's totally wild and is just its own animal, basically. But there are some somewhat familiar tropes here. Let's start with the case. That was sort of the MB&F side of it. And this front structure and back structure do remind you a little bit of an HM4. If you go look at the lugs of an HM4, it's sort of like that. This front part is fixed. I know it looks like it would move, but it's fixed. But the back is very heavily articulated. So when it sits on the wrist, this comes over the front of your wrist, and then this goes kind of straight back. So it's a fairly large watch, but it actually sits really well on the wrist because of this. Really, really incredible MB&F finishing here. And that's another thing that you notice because nothing really looks like an MB&F case. So this alternating of these kind of satin finish surfaces and the polished surfaces and these extremely interesting sweeps and angles and stuff like that is very MB&F. But in general, the shape is not really like any MB&F or anything else. You have this really cool kind of ribbed front section that definitely has an automotive vibe to it. But the whole thing, I wouldn't say is overly automotive inspired. You know, like an HM5 is a very automotive-y type of watch. It's also not a spaceship. It's not a plane. It's not really anything except its own sort of interesting organic form. It's been paired with this kind of aged calf strap, which is the OEM strap. And I think it really suits the watch, and it highlights the fact that this is sort of a watch that lives in its own time period. It has some vintage elements to it, some incredibly contemporary elements to it, and they really play off of each other well. The case is zirconium, which is similar to titanium. It's a little bit heavier. I think it's a little bit more scratch resistant, and these lugs are titanium, so it's a mix between the two. And on the back, you have a big power reserve. So let's go into the movement here. Now, the movement was inspired by a Wankel engine, which you may know as a rotary engine. This is a type of motor where instead of having pistons that go up and down, there's a triangular shape that moves around in a unique geometrical shape so that it goes up and down and around these sort of ellipsoid curves. It's a very mathematically related watch, and you'll see it when it works. They're really complex shapes, and in order to get it to work properly, there's pretty insane tolerances needed, especially at this central pinion. It's got a screw-in crown, and the crown is quite large and nice to use. It is manual wind, so you screw it out, and now we can give it a wind. Sometimes 12 o'clock crowns can be annoying, but this one is actually really easy because this lug articulates so much, so it just totally gets out of the way, and you have full access to the crown here. It doesn't take a lot of winds to juice this thing up, so there's some of it. Okay, so we're out in wind position. Let's pull it out to the time position, and I'll show you how this puppy works. Here you have a minute track, and here you have an hour track. So this is something that's unlike any other Urwerk. Urwerk usually uses hours that are somehow on the satellite. So, you know, like cubes that turn and show the hours, and then the hand just shows the minutes as it goes along. Here you have completely separate tracks for the minute and the hours. So that is the Wankel geometry. And what's cool is, if you haven't noticed yet, both the minute and the hour are their own rotary shapes. So it looks as if they're both hinged at this central pinion, but they're actually not on the exact same axis, and they have to be adjusted to an extreme tolerance to be able to make the geometry work correctly. So right there, you have it at 9 o'clock, right? 0, a little bit past, fine, and 9. And as we move through, 9:30, and at 10 o'clock, the one hand goes off there, the other hand comes back down here. So that's your Wankel engine-inspired, Urwerk executed movement. And this was an idea that Felix had and really wanted to execute for a long time. And Max thought it was super cool, and they had been coming up with some way to do this between them. And this is how they do it. You can see aesthetically, the movement does have a kind of Urwerk aesthetic to it, but it's way more technical looking than their movements often are. Lots of times you can't see that many sort of gears and things like that in an Urwerk movement. This one's pretty exposed and skeletonized, and there's really a lot to see. You can see all of these gears and hands, and then these big cages as they do their work. There's very little branding on the watch at all, as makes sense with the project. You have the unpronounceable name down there. We'll just call it Nitro. And you have it once again over here, and you just see it. It's the Experiment ZR12. So everything is basically on the back. You can see that it was 12 pieces. So to discuss a little bit about the 12 pieces, they originally made 12 pieces in zirconium, just like this, and they were released only online on this website that they didn't even send out to anybody. It was just supposed to be like a word of mouth campaign. But then the retailers wanted some sort of piece of it. They had customers call them. They wanted to be able to sell them. So I think the last couple of pieces of these actually did get sold through the retail network. The Nitro collaboration had to actually raise the price so that they could make it viable to sell through retailers. And then they made another edition of 12 that were zirconium, but they were black PVD'd. And those were all sold via the Hourglass in Singapore. So there were 24 total Nitros in existence, 12 zirconium, and these were the original ones that were supposed to be online only, but I know a couple retailers got their hands on them, and then the 12 black that were all through Singapore Hourglass. Unfortunately, the black ones can't be refinished, and because of the way the PVD was done. So, my bet is just this normal zirconium that actually looks, I think, awesome and really plays cool with this vibe. So this is the one I went for. And you can set the time in either direction, which is nice. Urwerk's actually really good about that. Most of their watches can go either way, which is really helpful when you don't want to go all the way from 3 back to 2. So let me show you the watch on the wrist. For those of you familiar with MB&F, you'll be familiar with this buckle. This is the buckle that's on all of their watches. It's the Chanel style, actually made by Chatelain, which is owned by them, and they make it for MB&F and for Richard Mille and a few other companies. It's this kind of spring-loaded deployant, and it has the same buckle that's on the MB&Fs. It'll look the same, but the MB&Fs have the MB&F logo, and they had them specially done with the Nitro flame logo for these, which is a nice touch. So it goes right on. You do that side, you do that side. I'm not going to bother putting them through, and there you have the watch. This is just one of the coolest watches I've ever put on my wrist. You can see how that back lug just really functions almost like a cuff. It holds the wrist completely and keeps the watch centered perfectly so that it is a big watch. And you guys know I don't have a big wrist, probably a little bit under 7 inches, and yet it feels great. I think it looks awesome. The watch is readable. It's not the easiest to read. I think I'll get used to it if I wear it a little bit more, but it's definitely not the easiest to read. There is lume, which is pretty cool, so you can kind of see how it would be. It's really comfortable. It's obviously a big watch, but it's not very heavy because it is titanium and zirconium, but you definitely feel it. And because the lugs fit the wrist so well, it actually doesn't sit very high. It's not super thick. The biggest part is this domed crystal here, which is actually this really interesting shape. I don't know if you've noticed that or if it comes across well on video, but it has this sort of high dome and then it's flat, or almost flat at least, across the top, which is pretty cool. I've never seen a crystal of that exact shape. So boy, I mean, does it get cooler than having the two coolest brands in modern horology make a collaboration that is totally under the radar, and only 24 of them have ever or will ever exist, and nobody knows what the heck they are? It's just awesome. It's just an awesome object, and it really captures kind of the best of a period of horology. I've been looking for one of these for a really long time, and I'm thrilled to be able to have it on my wrist and share it with you guys. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks.